it where it is right now. It passed with bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. It passed in April of 2019. And then it went to the Senate, which we all know is having a great deal of problems being very functional. And that's a bipartisan statement. And now there are two opposing laws, one supported by the Democrats, including our Senator Bennett, and then another one that is supported by the Republicans. Of significance is that the American Bar Association has now made this act one of their major legislative initiatives. The reason for that is because the Republican bill has a great deal of rollbacks that many people feel are really not acceptable. So that's all I'm going to say against about the Violence Against Women's Act. We have the privilege today of having three members from the Alliance of Chaffee County. I happen to feel that domestic violence and sexual violence is very much a civic situation. And so I'm delighted that the League of Women Voters has accepted education in regard to this aspect. And there's no better people to educate us than Shelley, which you just heard talking, and Debbie Quintana, who is the volunteer coordinator, and I know her in that role. And she's also the legal advocate. And then the third person is Kelly, and she is, just lost her last name, but they'll tell you. She is the new housing coordinator. So after that, I'm going to shut up and I'll give it back to Shelley.
Thanks, Carol. And thank you all, ladies, for having us. We're really excited to be able to be here to talk to you today. So Debbie and Kelly, I'm going to have you unmute yourselves if you can, please. And I'm just going to share our screen now, and that's going to show you where is it? Hold please, one moment. Okay, I'm definitely going to do that sharing of the screen for sure. When I can make that happen. But basically we're just going to walk through a little PowerPoint that we put together for you. If I do this, yes, that should get us done. Okay, so this is just a little PowerPoint presentation that we've put together to share with you some information about who we are at the Alliance, what we do, and then just give you some background about the prevalence and impacts of domestic and sexual violence. So, Debbie, do you want to kick us off and walk us through some of these specifics about the Alliance and who we are and what we do?
Sure. Thanks, Shelley, and thanks for everybody that's attending. Yeah, we are a nonprofit organization started in 1984 by a group of volunteers. And we have grown to still a nonprofit, but with 6 full-time and 1 half-time employee. And we serve victims of domestic violence and sexual violence. And our mission is to empower individuals beyond domestic violence and sexual violence through education, services, and social change. That social change, I think, is critical in helping to end any kind of violence. So what we do and what our organization is able to do is support victims through peer counseling, safety planning, legal advocacy, safe housing, housing advocacy and assistance, support group, community outreach and education. And we also have a 24/7 crisis line and a new chat line that are all set up to be confidential and also anonymous if somebody wants to stay anonymous and just ask questions. But we're here to listen. We're funded through federal grants, state grants, local grants, private donation, community fundraising. And all of the funds go towards assisting people in living in a safe home.
Thanks, Debbie, for going over those specifics. If anyone has questions, remember that you'll type those into the chat box. And due to the nature of me sharing my screen, but also monitoring the chat box, we're going to hold on to all those questions until we are finished so that I can easily go back and forth between the screens. We just had someone join, so I'm going to just quickly catch them up. We are staff from the Alliance based in Chaffee County. My name is Shelly, and I am the Sexual Assault Response Team Coordinator. We're also hearing from Debbie Quintana. She's our legal advocate and volunteer coordinator. And Kelly Ziegler, you can see part of her face there in her video. Oh, looky there, I can look at it. Thanks, Kelly. So we're just here to talk to you a little bit about what the Alliance does and some of the prevalence and impacts of domestic violence on our community. So Debbie, do you want to keep on keeping on and let us know and talk to us a little bit about domestic violence?
Absolutely. So domestic violence is defined as one partner using coercion, manipulation, all kinds of different tactics to gain power and control over somebody in an intimate relationship. And as you can see with the power and control wheel, it talks about all the different things that somebody uses to gain that control. Coercion, manipulation, emotional abuse, a lot of times that's where it first starts. And so sometimes we actually have clients that come in and say, I don't even know if it is domestic violence, I've never been hit. And a lot of times there is no physical assault. If coercion, manipulation, financial abuse, isolation, if those tactics work, they don't have to use physical assault or sexual assault. But if they don't, and somebody fights against that control, that's when we see physical assault or sexual violence towards a person. So the prevalence in Chaffee County, as you can see, these. When I first started here, I've been associated since 2000 as a client, as a volunteer, as a board member, and now as staff for the past 12 years full-time. And 5 to 6 years ago, our numbers were about 225 to 240 clients that we work with a year. Because of our expanded programming and because of being able to talk to people in the community and awareness around these issues, we have grown to where we served 798 new and existing clients in 2019. That's in Chaffee County, Western Fremont, and Northern Saguache counties. And so far this year, we've served around 590 clients. And to note, because of COVID, worldwide, domestic violence and sexual assault went up 40%. And our increase for safe house nights went up 60% since the beginning of March. There's a lot of people think that this is a women's issue. Domestic violence is a society issue, and the impacts are across the board, community and family. And so what happens is people that are in domestic violence situations miss work, which lowers productivity for all of our people that employ anybody in these situations. Also, a lot of children miss school, either because there's been an incident and they're too tired, or because they will say that they're sick because they're too worried to go to school because they want to stay home and make sure they can protect the victim. There's housing insecurity and homelessness. Substance abuse issues arise, mental health struggles. There's injury and there is death. And I can tell you, I've had 9 clients who have been murdered through the last 12 years that I've worked here. Also, child abuse is prevalent in 60% of all domestic violence cases, though it is one of the least reported things to law enforcement. Domestic violence also nationwide, it causes billions of dollars in medical care, in mental health costs, in low productivity. And the one statistic on here that I think is relevant is more females go to the emergency room because of domestic violence more than car accidents, muggings, work-related accidents combined. And that's a pretty staggering number. And it's also one of the reasons that we are so privileged to be in the role that we are in the role, that we get to support this community.
That's great. Debbie, thank you so much. I know there's a couple questions in the chat box. We're going to hold on to those until the end and do all of the questions at once. So hang on to those questions and we'll get to them. And then as questions arise as we're going along, just go ahead and type them right in. You don't have to wait till the end to submit your questions because we're going to do them all at one time. So if you have any questions about what Debbie just talked about, please type that into the chat box. Next, we're going to talk about sexual violence. So what really are we talking about when we're talking about sexual violence? There's sexual violence is a bit of an umbrella term that encompasses a lot of different behaviors. So it encompasses sexual harassment, including things like unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, touching, jokes, comments, that kind of thing. It also encompasses sexual assault. So what a lot of people think of as sexual violence would fall under this category. So we're talking about rape or attempted rape, fondling or sexual touching. And that includes the use of force or coercion. And I think that's a really important point to mention because not all sexual violence involves the sort of cultural zeitgeist of a nefarious character hiding in the bushes and jumping out and forcing their victim into sexual behavior. In fact, it's quite the opposite. About 90% of sexual assaults are perpetrated by someone that the victim knows. It also encompasses sexual abuse, which is typically used to describe acts perpetrated against children. And so sexual abuse would be things like forcing children to touch each other or touch the perpetrator, forcing them to view pornography or other, sexual materials. It also encompasses incest. So some notes about the prevalence. Someone in America experiences sexual violence every 73 seconds. In 2019, Chaffee County law enforcement responded to 26 reports of sexual violence. But worth noting there is that only about 30% of sexual violence is reported. And that's actually, to be very specific, about 30% of sexual assaults are reported. Sexual harassment and other things of that nature are far less reported than actual sexual assault. Also worth noting, all of the activities and behaviors under that umbrella are not necessarily illegal. So all sexual assault is sexual violence, but not all sexual violence is sexual assault, and not all of it is against the law. Sexual and domestic violence can happen to anyone. That's age, gender, socioeconomic level, race, etc. However, there are, for sexual violence, some groups that are at higher risk. So that would include LGBTQ plus folks, people with developmental delays, and older adults. It has a lot of the same impacts as domestic violence that Debbie already covered. Some of the more specific impacts that you'll see when it comes to sexual violence are a lot of mental health issues, depression and anxiety, panic attacks, substance abuse. Suicide attempts is actually very prevalent among folks who have experienced sexual violence. Sexual dysfunction, so having either having like developmentally inappropriate hypersexualized behavior or a lack of involvement in sexual behavior are both really common things that we see in folks who've experienced domestic or sexual violence, and PTSD. So a lot of times I think folks really gravitate toward the idea of contacting law enforcement when it comes to sexual assault in particular. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the reporting options that folks have when they have experienced sexual assault. So there are different levels of reporting. Folks can make what we call an anonymous report. So that would be if somebody called, say, the Alliance and disclosed that they had been assaulted and they want to access medical care and evidence collection, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But they don't want their name associated with the case. So that is actually that is an option that's available to folks. And the reasons for that are kind of broad. They might be being that we live in such a small community, they might be concerned about their confidentiality, their privacy. But far more often what we see is people not ready to make that decision at that time. So folks who've experienced sexual violence typically are really undergoing a lot of trauma. Their brain is working differently than someone who hasn't experienced trauma. And an inability to process information and make decisions is a very common thing that we see in people who are experiencing trauma. And so we want to offer this anonymous option to people so that if they aren't sure if they want to report to law enforcement or not, they can still have their medical care taken care of and they can still access evidence collection. And they have up to 2 years to decide if they want to make that law enforcement report or not. Another option that we have for folks is what we call a medical report. So that's similar to an anonymous report in that those folks would be contacting either the Alliance or a friend or family or some other outside agency that is not law enforcement. And they would come to our nurses and have that exam done, have the evidence collected, have their medical care taken care of. And in that case, their evidence collection is tested, but their name is not yet associated with the case. And if the evidence in that kit matches something that's in the database, so if that perpetrator has already been reported for sexual violence and the DNA matches, at that point it becomes a law enforcement report and the victim's name and identifying information is attached to that. And then the last type of report is what we call a law enforcement report. So in those cases, it would be that the survivor has chosen to contact law enforcement, report an incident of sexual violence, and we would do the same exact exam as we do for the other two, care for their medical care, look after, collect that evidence, and then that evidence gets submitted to law enforcement for prosecution. So there are a lot of different options that folks have, and these options are designed to accommodate survivors who may not be prepared to make a decision or maybe have some concerns about their safety, their privacy, their confidentiality. And it's a very victim-centered approach to giving people options about what to do next when it comes to experiencing sexual violence. So what happens in those exams and how does that program work? So we currently have 4 SANE nurses. That stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. And these are specially trained nurses who have been trained in caring for victims of sexual assault and collecting their evidence. They're on call 24/7. And we have 3 locations around Chaffee County where we conduct these exams. Exams are offered to any survivor regardless of their decision to report. So we covered that a little bit previously. So the exam includes medical care, basically taking care of any injuries that might be present. Now, one caveat here is if there are injuries that are medically emergent, then we have to refer those folks to the emergency room to have that emergent medical condition taken care of. So for example, if there's a head injury or if there was strangulation, which is very, very common in sexual violence, in those cases, we would refer that patient to the emergency room to have those emergent medical conditions taken care of. We also do evidence collection. So there's a envelope full of swabs and all other types of evidence collection. And so we collect all that evidence. We also offer emergency contraception if there's a risk of pregnancy from the assault. That is completely voluntary on the part of the survivor, but we do make that available to them. If the time frame from the assault makes it relevant, we'll do pregnancy testing. Of course, there's a time window in which you can't test too early, basically. And we also do presumptive STD treatment. And so if a survivor is concerned that there's a risk of them having contracted a sexually transmitted disease from their perpetrator, we just treat them and then do follow-up testing in a few weeks to make sure that that comes back negative. Survivors are also referred to the Alliance for Further Services. Some of the things that Debbie was talking about previously, and then some of the things that Kelly's going to talk about in terms of housing. And worth noting, survivors never pay for SANE services. So if this exam happens because of a law enforcement report, the law enforcement agency that is investigating pays for that exam. If it is an anonymous report, there's a state-funded program that pays for any and all costs associated with the exam. So that is the section on sexual violence. Again, I see that we have lots of questions in the chat. Thank you so much for your questions. Really eager to get into that and start answering those questions for you, but we're going to do that all at one time. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly Ziegler. She's our housing coordinator at the Alliance, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about the intersections and impact of domestic and sexual violence and housing. Take it away, Kelly.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here today. Thank you all, and excited to see that we have so many people joining us. As Shelley said, my name is Kelly Ziegler, and I'm the new housing coordinator here at the Alliance. Very excited to be here. Housing is definitely a challenge for Chaffee County as well as all of Colorado. So domestic and sexual violence in housing. I want to talk about the link between the two. And first of all, I know that that picture is kind of small and difficult to see, but starting up at the left, the two most pressing concerns for survivors of abuse are the need for safe housing and the need for economic resources to maintain their safety. 80% of homeless women have experienced domestic violence previously, and up to 57% of victims say that homelessness is directly caused by domestic or sexual violence. Some of the barriers to safety, and Debbie addressed these briefly, but some of the manipulative tactics that abusers will use are to ruin credit, create a poor rental history for the victim. They often are isolated, not allowed to work, so they don't have any employment skills or history of employment. Causing victims often are forced to miss work as a result of the violence, or they're fired as a result of stalking, harassment, and other things that occur at the workplace. Housing discrimination, the most common cases of this occur when landlords evict victims from housing due to repeated calls to the police, and loss of subsidized or other affordable housing options. Oftentimes, people will lose their vouchers for affordable housing because of behaviors of the abuser. Okay. The link between domestic and sexual violence and housing. So the need for safe and affordable housing is one of the most pressing concerns for survivors of violence and abuse. Housing instability is 4 times more likely for women who have experienced domestic violence than for those who have not. And many abusers deliberately destroy their victims' economic and housing stability as a means of trapping them in a relationship. Some of the ways we just talked about. And so housing for victims in Chaffee County. Because Chaffee County is surrounded by small rural communities in all directions, victims often choose to file their protection orders or move to Chaffee County for increased protection. Our central location, the availability of work, community connections, other supportive services, these all make Salida an often more accessible choice for victims who are coming from surrounding areas. And that's what we often see here at the Alliance. How are we doing in Chaffee County? The self-sufficiency standard for Chaffee County in 2018 shows that families need an income more than twice that of the federal poverty level just to make ends meet due to our housing costs. How can we support victims with housing in this housing market? This is an ongoing discussion that we have here. And it's something I know that the 2016 needs assessment has driven the formation of the Chaffee housing authority. And so the people have spoken, and there is some movement to look at how do we create more affordable housing. However, these projects are not immediate. They're long-term. It takes time, money, cooperation. But in the meantime, we need to support our victims. And we can do that often by providing them with short-term emergency safe housing. We offer transitional housing, and then long-term housing supports and utility assistance. We also provide our victims with other supportive services like Debbie talked about. And our goal here is really to help victims to, to develop these good landlord relationships, stable rental histories. So we can empower them to be able to have a safe home for them and their family so that they don't have to return to their abuser. And oftentimes housing is one of the biggest challenges for victims. And I know Debbie talked about this, but just briefly, since March 1st to June 30th of this year, the Alliance has been able to help with $28,700 in flexible financial assistance through our housing program. We have also, that is also equivalent to 305 shelter nights, which is an increase of 306% from last year. So clearly COVID has impacted the need for safe shelter.
Right. Kelly, thank you so much for that overview of the housing program. One of our most powerful programs for sure. We put some information in here about VAWA, but Carol really already covered these bases and explained that really well. So just want to reiterate for folks on the call that it's really important for us to get this reauthorized, and a great way to do that is to contact your legislators and ask them to reauthorize this. I know we all know there's a lot going on over there with our legislative leaders, but we think, and I think you'll all agree that this is important enough that we need to bring this front and center for them, even during this time of extreme transition. So some ways that you can help. I'll take this first one and talk about probably one of the most important ways that folks can help is just to support survivors. So I don't think it's going to come as like a raging surprise to anyone on this call that we live in a culture and in a society that really stigmatizes victims of domestic and sexual violence. Really, it's quite a cultural norm to sort of not believe survivors or try to find ways that they did something wrong to exacerbate the abuse or to somehow deserve that sexual assault. We hear a lot about, what were they wearing? How much did she drink, et cetera, et cetera. And so really one of the most powerful ways that folks in the community can help is just to support survivors and believe them. And we know that, if only 30% of sexual violence is being reported to law enforcement, and maybe a handful more are being reported directly to us, we know this is happening, but we know that they aren't reaching out to us. We know that the people that victims and survivors are disclosing their abuse and their assault to are their friends and their family and their clergy people and their hairdresser and their massage therapist. And so as Debbie said, when we first got started, people really frame this as a women's issue, but this is really a community issue. And this is something that impacts us all. And so really taking the time to support survivors, offer support, and really support their choices, because a lot of times we want to hear them saying that they're going to leave or that they're going to contact law enforcement. And survivors are the experts on their own lives. They know how to keep themselves safe. They've been doing it all this time, right? And so calling law enforcement or leaving the relationship may not always be the best way to keep themselves safe and to survive. And so even when we see survivors making choices that we don't like or we don't find satisfying, It's so critically important for us to support those choices anyway, and to help them understand how they can keep themselves safe within the confines of the situation that they've chosen for themselves. And then the last thing there would just be direct them to resources. Now that you're all here on this call with us, you know who we are and what we do and what we can offer. And so use us as a resource. It doesn't have to, we want people to call us. It doesn't just have to be that someone calls because they've been brutally assaulted or raped. If you, as a community member, have a friend who you think might not be safe, or your, you know, niece or your friend from work confides in you that they're experiencing abuse and assault and you don't know how to respond and you don't know what to say, call us. We'll help talk you through it. We'll answer those questions for you, and we'll help you be a good supportive person for that survivor. So I would say that's number one of how you can help, and really, really important. Kelly, can you talk a little bit about how folks can donate to the Alliance?
Absolutely. So there are several ways that you can donate. Of course, monetary donations. And if you go to our website, there is an easy, just big purple button, donate, and you click right on that. You can also donate your time. We have a robust volunteer program, which Debbie runs, and there are many ways to volunteer. We are always looking for certain household items, other clothing, and maybe furniture items that survivors need to establish their home. And in fact, if you check our Facebook page out periodically, and later today, I'll be posting the newest wish list. And then if you have another idea, or you just want to get more involved, please just pick up the phone, give me a call, and we'll find a way to get you plugged in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kelly. And one other thing is, when we do those SANE exams that I was telling you all about before, we have to keep their clothes because that's evidence. And so we're trying to put together some kits that we can send survivors home with some fresh clothes, socks, hoodie, that kind of stuff. And then just some nice comfort items to kind of help bring them some comfort and some healing in those times. And so that's also another way that folks can donate. And then Debbie, can you talk a little bit about how folks can volunteer?
Absolutely. First, just call and let us know what you're interested in doing. We do always have a need for crisis line volunteers that takes the phone. So staff mans it during the week normally, but to be able to have somebody that's trained to take it on the weekends really kind of helps us, so that when we come in Monday, we're ready to go. But we also have different things like safe house maintenance. We do have a couple safe houses that sometimes we need weeds pulled, or new paint, or curtains, or just things like that, or even furniture moved in. We also have fundraisers, and pre-COVID, we would have a long list of things. Right now, our coordinator for fundraising is doing a whole lot of different online things, but anybody that is happy to go ask somebody for money, we can always plug you in that kind of spot too. And also our new chat line. So the chat line is manned Monday and Wednesday from noon until 5. And this is where, especially, I think teenagers might kind of connect with just being able to be anonymous and ask questions and tell their story and ask for resources. And that's something anybody can do from home, is man this chat line. We also have a lot of people, when we're talking about housing issues, if somebody does need to move or relocate, how do they move their things if they're not connected with family, friends, and that kind of support? So sometimes we need help with people moving their whole home. And so just being able to have somebody we can call, have that list of people we can go to, that somebody that has a truck that we can borrow. And something as simple as data entry. So we do have a lot of things going on all the time, and all the data collected helps in our grant funding. So if somebody's helping put all this data in, we can run reports our director can really use all that to help write the grants that keep us running, keep us our doors open, keep our safe house options open for people that need it. So there might be some people that also have experience teaching yoga that might want to do a class for either staff or for our support group people. That's always an option. We have a board member who is wanting to do a healthy wellness cooking program. And so there's all sorts of options that we may not be able to think of because we're here in the trenches doing the work. But if there's things that you have you have an idea that you'd like to present or help support our clients with, we would love to hear from you. We welcome new ideas.
That's great. Debbie, thank you so much. I'm going to stop our screen sharing now so that you can see our faces a little bit better as we answer what I'm sure are your awesome questions. So I'm just going to get in here. First question is from Marilyn. Hi, Marilyn. Thank you for your question. And she asks, do you have enough safe houses to meet the need?
Well, I can address that. And I have to say no would be the answer. However, emergency safe housing is probably the one thing that we have more of. I think when we look at supporting our clients for the long term, we struggle with more transitional and long-term housing options that are affordable for our clients and affordable for the majority of people working in Chaffee County. So that is an ongoing issue. If you know of someone who has a rental property that they are looking to rent, have them give me a call. I would love to talk to them. We often provide rental support for our clients so they can establish some history, some good rental history. So it could be a good option if you want to support victims directly, but you don't kind of want to be that direct person. I can be the go-between. Please just give me a call and we'll figure something out. But we always need more housing options, period.
Yeah, definitely.
We are able to sometimes connect and refer people to other locations as well where there are safe housing. Leadville has an actual shelter, and so a lot of times we'll collaborate with them. We'll be the main service provider for clients, but they'll be living up there for an extended period of time.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you so much. Sue asks if we'll share the PowerPoint. Yes, I'll make sure that you have access to that. I'll probably have Karen or Carol or someone in charge send that out to the list. But yes, we'd be happy to share this. Karen asks, what is the criteria for safe house? Are there singles and families in need of housing?
Absolutely. So we really strive to keep the barriers low. We want victims to seek out safe shelter. So we do not put up any criteria per se. There is confidentiality agreement that they sign with us, but they just need to be seeking safe shelter from a domestic or sexual violence situation. That's the only criteria.
Great, thank you. This is an interesting question from Marilyn. What percentage of your clients are male?
Right now, I would say that would be about 4%. And I believe the only reason we do know that in domestic violence, we talk about 97% of all offenders being male. I do believe, though, because reporting across the United States, it is much harder for males to ask for help because of all the stigmas that go with it. So we do know that there is a higher percentage out there, but we do absolutely serve men that call us.
Yeah, and in terms of sexual violence, it's actually not as vast of a difference between the percentage of women that have experienced sexual violence and the percentage of men. About 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual violence and 1 in 6 men, which for a lot of the same reasons that Debbie is describing, the actual reporting is quite hard. You know, there's very little male reporting of sexual violence, certainly to law enforcement and also to agencies like ours. And I think it's probably quite the same as you're describing, Debbie, is there's just a lot of stigma. There's not a lot of understanding. And, you know, environments, I mean, if a male client were to come to us, you know, it's just a very female dominated movement. And so, you know, I think we're working on being more inclusive and being more conscious about making sure that our spaces and our staffs and our agencies, you know, are equally as trauma informed and victim centered for men as they are for women. That's really hard, but I think that's definitely something that I've seen us putting some focus on. And so while we don't have a ton right now, it is not because men are not experiencing domestic and sexual violence. So the next question, oh, Ellen wants to know if we can repost the first few slides. Ellen, we're going to send that out to everybody so you'll have access to those and you can look at them whenever you'd like. Carol asks, what is the prevalence of sexual assault in Colorado? It's pretty consistent with nationwide, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men. So it doesn't differ dramatically here versus any other place in the country. It's pretty on par. In terms of like Chaffee County, again, our numbers seem quite low, but we do not think that's because sexual violence is happening less often in Chaffee County. We think it is because there's just a lot of education and outreach to be done, really on my part. That's my job, right? So that people understand not only that these services are available to them and that they have these options when it comes to reporting that we talked about, but also just making sure that people understand what sexual violence actually is. Because one big barrier to people accessing services is that they have to identify as someone who is a victim of sexual assault. And so much of sexually violent behavior is very normalized in our culture and in the media and, you know, in entertainment media in particular. And so that in tandem with the fact that it's a very, very common response for folks who have been victims of sexual violence to minimize the thing that happened to them, and to really say, well, okay, it was bad, but at least I didn't get raped, or at least I didn't get, you know, at least XYZ thing didn't happen to me. And so that, coupled with the fact that so much of this behavior is really normalized, it kind of results in folks not even really realizing that the thing that happened to them was not okay. And so there's a lot of education that I need to do, both in our community and then that we as a movement need to do nationwide and worldwide to make people understand what sexual violence is and normalize seeking help for those things. So the next question is from, oh, that's just Karen telling everyone the presentation will be recorded and available so you can go back and watch if you missed part of it. Karen, I'm not sure I understand the question, but she says, if there is a DNA match, you can report that. I think you're probably
It
talking.
continues to down.
Oh, okay. You can report the incident with law enforcement without the victim's permission. No. So I think you're probably just talking about the medical report option in which evidence is collected anonymously and it's tested, and if it makes a match with the database. So no, we can't do it without their permission. Basically, if that's the report they choose to make, they know ahead of time that if this matches, they will be contacted by law enforcement. So they consent to that before the exam. Let's see. What legislation in Colorado needs to be presented to improve services for victims? You know, Debbie, I don't know if you or Kelly want to answer that, but well, I'll give you an opportunity to answer that before I give my answer. if you want to.
I think there's several different things. One, absolutely how financial support. So Mississippi and Colorado are the only two states in the nation that are not a line item on their state budget to fund to be able to support victims. And so that's one topic that we talk about a lot. And so much effort is put into these grants and these donations that otherwise might be able to put into direct services.
And then I would just add to that again, VAWA and the importance of that and how that protects victims, especially in a housing sense. If someone flees a domestic violence situation where they're named on a lease, VAWA, the law helps protect them from eviction on their record, from being held liable for that rent. So those laws are really important, and it's important that we keep those in place and active all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say that due to the small staff size that we have at the Alliance, we try our best to keep on top of these things. But a really good resource, if you want to get a little deeper into the legislative and policy pieces of this, would be Violence Free Colorado or the Colorado Coalition Against Sex Assault. Both of those agencies have staff and committees dedicated just to monitoring these things for us, because we do focus on direct services, and that legislative and policy piece is something that those agencies focus more on. And so if there are questions about policy or legislation that we can't answer, that's a good place to go as well. I will also say it's 12:52, so I'm just time checking. I'm going to get through as many of these questions as we can, but if I'm not able to get to them all, I will copy and paste this chat, and we'll make sure that every question gets answered and that you all get the information via email. So another person, hi Bagel, my cat likes to join in on Zoom calls. Somebody else asks, what legislation at the state level do we need, and what the bill number that Michael Bennett is part of. I think we'll follow up on that via email, because I don't know that off my head, and I don't know that anybody would know that off our heads, but we can get that information for you.
I would say too, Shelley, that CCASA has a lot of details about legislation on their website. So
yeah, they do. CCASA is a great resource, as is Violence Free Colorado. So someone asks Kate asks where they can give household donations. Kelly, do you want to address that?
Sure. We accept in-kind donations here at the office. You can call me. I can pick those up for you as well. I can be reached during business hours at 719-221-8151. And our office is on Oak Street, 627 Oak Street.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
We'll arrange to pick those up. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Somewhat related, Karen asks, do you have a relationship with the Habitat Restore for household items or with the thrift stores? ?
We do.
Yeah, and one great thing is that we want this all to be client driven. So a lot of the things that we talk about as far as resources is we give the client the information to go talk to these places. The Restore can be someplace that, if we need something for one of our safe houses, we could go up and talk to them about. But also, if a client needs clothes for a job interview or something, we can send them to the resource center, which will enable them to go to, say, Karen and Sharon to go get clothing that they might need.
That's great. Thanks, Debbie. There is a really good question on here that I'm going to skip past because I worry that we won't even have time to address it. So, Susan, you asked about VAWA and the murder of women. I'm going to address that in email because we only have a very few minutes, and I don't want to shorten the answer to your question because I think it deserves a lot of attention. So we'll get an answer to you via email. So Karen asks what the training for a volunteer for the chat or the crisis line.
It's a 30-hour comprehensive training. A lot of it can be done They would come meet with me. I would set you up with the online training through Violence Free Colorado that you could do online. Then I hold an all-day training for new volunteers. So it's very comprehensive. And then there's always support if you are on call, that you will have a backup, either a volunteer. I have some that have been here almost 8 years now, or a staff member would always be there to support you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm just scrolling through to pull out a couple good questions I think we can tackle in the time we have. Let's see. Marilyn asks, do you have special services for older adults?
All of our services are for everybody. So we can connect people to the area agency on aging. We can connect them with adult protection if needed, but our services, the same services, are from anybody's economic background, educational background, age, all of that. And I think there was one specific question I saw about also about like education and stuff, and really wanted to talk about, we have an outreach coordinator, Latino youth outreach coordinator, who is in the schools right now for the next 2 weeks for an hour at a time, talking about healthy relationships, because that's something that isn't talked about. A lot of times it's about what is abuse and how to get people out of it, but how can we have those conversations in the high school and in middle school about what a healthy relationship looks like and how to have that self worth that you deserve to have a healthy relationship. So that's one of the things I'm very proud of that we do and have done over the years, is go into the schools to give that kind of education to our youth.
Yeah, in fact, Mike, he's our Latino and youth outreach coordinator. He and I spent all day on Friday with the, if folks are familiar with Elevate Her, it's an organization for young, middle school, high school girls to do outside activities. And we spent the day with them on Friday doing presentations with them about healthy relationships and consent. And it was really awesome. So really looking forward to doing some more of that. So that's most of our questions. There are a couple here that I'm going to make sure we follow up with via email. But it is 12:57, and I imagine that Karen or Carol probably wants to do any kind of a wrap up for you all. So I will stop talking. And Karen, if you want to unmute yourself and wrap us up, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You ladies did a great job, and that was a lot of good information for us. I'm glad we have it recorded. And if you want to send any of those responses to my email, Shelley, I can make sure that they get out to, everybody who's a member. And
yeah, absolutely. I will make sure.
Right. And so we look forward to maybe having you guys attend our meeting on December 14th with the chiefs of police and the sheriff. If you have questions, you can send them to me and we'll make sure that those get answered there. So I want to thank everybody for participating, and Carol especially for getting this together, and go to the website and keep up to date on our league issues. Thank you again, Shelley, for all your technology, and we will be in touch. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks.
Kelly.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.